Now, into the ticket office of Disneyland.
Oh boy, let's do this.
Don't think the CIA is going to be trying to hack your second-gen iPod.
I didn't think so. There might have been a lot of illegal music on there. I wouldn't doubt it. But, I mean...
You were supposed to bring death to the flagships, not join them.
That's a pill with 2 screens and it's open and you gotta swallow it.
iTunes is a constant source of embarrassment.
Behind-the-scenes camera crap.
I am ashamed to live in this world.
I am Manila. I can't do it anymore without laughing. I was going to do the whole thing.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Calling All Platforms podcast. I'm your host today, Caleb, and as you've probably guessed, that means Wes isn't here. So we've got Landon.
Hey.
And this is the crew today. Because, you know, we have not yet managed to train a neural network that is capable of replacing Wes. We're working on it, but not quite complete. So,
yeah, I mean, we should probably use something other than whatever Microsoft is putting out.
We're trying to just like reskin Cortana to be Wes, but it turns out Cortana not super helpful. So, you know.
And I mean, we would try to use like Google or something, but they don't like talking about Microsoft things for some weird reason.
No, that's true. We've tried using Siri, but also not helpful.
Yeah.
And Alexa just keeps trying to sell us stuff. So I don't know.
She's nuts.
All right. Well, listener, we are here to catch you up on all of the tech news that has happened over the past couple of weeks, by which we mean mostly over the past week, because really not much happened 2 weeks ago. That's why we didn't record an episode last week. So
yeah, not much happened this week, to be fair, either.
That's true. There was in industry kind of a big event called Computex for, you know, the folks, well, for all of the tech companies wanted to get together and show off the really amorphous kind of strange technology demos that they have currently. It's stuff they're working on that might turn into a product that you, the consumer, can buy in 2, 3, 4, 5 years kind of thing, but nothing really super immediate. Like, for instance, I believe it was Asus announced a 500 hertz monitor that has like the worst stats other than refresh rate that you could possibly imagine. It's using a TM panel, which means that if you are not sitting directly in front of it, you can't see it. It's like got the worst color accuracy that you can possibly have and still have a color monitor. It's really dim. I think the peak brightness was like 200 or 300 nits, so it's not even a bright monitor. It's 1080p, nothing super fancy there. And yeah, it's just 500 hertz. That's all it is. But that's because it's not actually a product. They're like, yeah, we're working on this. It'll be ready in like 2024 or something like that. So it's not a product yet. You know, it's not ready. And that's pretty much everything at Computex for the most part. So that did happen this week, but not a ton of great consumer news for you, listener.
I've realized something while you've been talking. So Computex is like CES to the tech engineer nerds.
Yeah.
Like, because CES to people like us is a tech nerd show.
Yeah.
Like, most people don't care about it, even if they're somewhat into tech. But it's like us that are into tech, we kind of care about it. Computex is that, but for the ultra tech, like I said, the engineer tech nerds that really care about the nuts and bolts behind the technology.
Right.
And even then, it's like the extreme nerdy ones of those. That's what Computex is for.
Like CES is the Consumer Electronics Show. So they show up with demos that are interesting to consumers. You know, where they're showing off the thing that a consumer is going to look at and be like, wouldn't it be cool if that was a product I could buy? Whereas Computex, they show up with the technologies that go into the demos at CES and show that off so that it's basically like all of the other companies that are looking at it and going, wouldn't it be cool if that was a product I could buy? You know, I can pretty much guarantee that Samsung Display and LG Display and all of those people looked at this 500 hertz monitor and went, ooh, I can't wait to incorporate that technology into my monitors that I sell to consumers.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's yet another step removed from what consumers are actually purchasing. So it's interesting to kind of look at, but aside from a few things, like for instance, in a couple of years, you might be able to buy an actual monitor not like the one they showed off, but like an actually good monitor that has a 500 hertz refresh rate. That matters to you if you're a professional esports player. So, okay. Are you, listener? Are you a professional esports player? Are you in the Overwatch League? If so, send us an email at podcast@callingallplatforms.com. I would love to talk. Anywho, especially if you're on the Gladiators, I have words. Anyhow, I'm not going to get into that. It's not been a super great couple of weeks for the Gladiators. So there was one thing that came out of Computex that does directly affect consumers over the next year and that I want to talk about because it's actually kind of exciting. AMD, my favorite processor company over the past 5 years because they brought competition into a space that frankly had none and made Intel get better. And I'm not sure how much of an effect Ryzen had on Apple ditching Intel, but I think that it was there.
It definitely didn't help the situation.
No, yeah. Like Apple, I think, was unhappy with Intel before AMD started being good. But I'm pretty sure once AMD started being good, Apple was like, oh my gosh, this is getting ridiculous. And then after a couple of years of Intel not doing anything, they're like, screw it, we're gone. So yeah, basically AMD rocks. And they continue to rock. So they talked about their upcoming Ryzen 7000 series processors and their AM5 platform that is going to be underpinning that new processor generation. So these are the Zen 4, chips that use the next version of the Zen core, and it's gonna be kind of like, it's not an incremental improvement this year like it was last year. It is going to be kind of a big deal. So here's what we're expecting from AM5, according to what AMD has said. So this is just the platform itself, right? This is the physical socket that the processor slots into and the motherboards associated with it. Now, based on the motherboard you buy and the processor that you buy, you may not get all of these things, but this is the maximum possibility of their top-end CPUs with the high-end motherboards for the AM5 socket. Now, they're going to be able to have up to 24 PCIe 5.0 lanes. What's interesting, two things that are interesting about this. I'm pretty sure that the highest-end Intel chips currently do support PCIe 5, but only, I think, like 16 lanes of it or something like that. Or maybe like 20. I can't remember, but it's more lanes than Intel has, and they're all 5.0. From what I understand, Intel has you can do 16 lanes of 5.0, like 16 lanes of 5.0 and then 4 lanes of 4.0. Or maybe it's like 10 lanes of 5 or 12 lanes of, I don't know. It's divided up between PCIe 5 and PCIe 4. The other thing that's interesting is PCIe 4 was introduced and it was the new hotness 2 years ago. And we're already on PCIe 5, which is interesting if you were paying attention to PCIe 3, which sat around for, I don't even know, 20 years? I don't know. PCIe 3.0 was the standard for a really long time with no improvements made. So again, I think we might very well have Ryzen to thank for that, by pushing the entire industry to be like, ooh, we can make things faster and better now. It's also going to support DDR5 instead of DDR4, so up to the next standard of RAM. Based on what they were showing us, it looks like it's going to be a very stable implementation of DDR5, a little bit better than what Intel's current generation has, which is fair because Intel they were the first ones to do DDR5, so they were cutting their teeth on it, and kind of the entire industry was able to benefit from what they were doing. It's going to allow you to have up to 14 20 gigabyte per second USB ports. So those are the high-speed USB-C standards. And you can have up to 14 of those. Obviously, that's going to depend on your motherboard and your case and which CPU you have and a whole lot of things. But up to 14 is a lot.
I mean, I'm trying to think of all the different things I could put with that. I don't have 14 things to plug into that are USB-C, that are USB-C in general, let alone USB-C.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. 20 gigabytes per second is, hold on. gigabits per second. I capitalized that wrong in my notes, listener. So it's gigabits per second, I'm pretty sure. But even still, 20 gigabits per second is insanely fast communication speed. Like, that's, faster than Ethernet kind of thing, for most people. And so it's, really, really fast. Most of the time you use that to plug in a dock, that has like a bunch of other USB ports on it that are all 10 gigabit per second ports or something like that. So being able to support up to 14 of those things means that you can saturate this thing with a hilarious amount of I/O. And I don't know how motherboard manufacturers would choose to implement that, but I'd imagine some of those would probably be like internal that you could use to communicate with like RGB and stuff inside of your case. Like, it's just, I don't know what you would do with 14 ports like that.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Thanks, AMD. They'll also be able to support up to, so probably not all of this, but they could theoretically do 4 HDMI 2.1 or DisplayPort 2 ports. So that's the latest HDMI and DisplayPort port standards. And they'd be able to have up to 4 of those off of a single CPU, which gets more interesting when we talk a little bit about Ryzen 7000, but also the AM5 platform is going to natively support Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.1. So the latest standards that are all the best. 6E is interesting because in addition to all of the bandwidth improvements and stuff like that came with Wi-Fi 6, it actually introduces new spectrum. So, listener, you may remember several years ago when we made all kind of overnight or mysteriously over a period of time, I suppose, made the switch from 2.4 to 5 gigahertz, right? Like when you started noticing that when you're setting up your router, there was a 2.4 and there was a 5, and it says that at the end of your name of your network and stuff like that. Yeah, so these Wi-Fi 6E routers will have a 6 as well. They'll have a 6 gigahertz range. So that's kind of cool. It's nice that they'll be supporting that natively right out of the box. So that's AM5. Lots of options for expandability and very interesting things there. So that's cool. Now let's talk about the Ryzen 7000 chips that AMD expects to be putting into these sockets. The first and most interesting thing, I think, in terms of their direct competition with Intel, is that they are suggesting that their top-end chips will have boost clocks of up to 5.5 gigahertz on a 16-core CPU with no E-core equivalents in it. They're not doing a big little design the way that Intel has done, which allows Intel to have like more than half of the cores on the CPU are really super energy efficient and are not running very hot, so that they can have the few higher powered cores, the P cores that they have on their chips. Those will boost up to 5.5 gigahertz. And what AMD is suggesting is, nah, screw that. All of our cores are so efficient that we can boost some of them up to 5.5 gigahertz, regardless of what the rest of them are doing. So that's pretty impressive, especially since the only Intel CPU that gets up to that right now is their absolute top-of-the-line, highly binned 12900KS. So AMD is firing back against that pretty hard, and their per core performance with Ryzen so far has been absolutely astonishing in comparison to Intel. They do way more with way less clock speed than Intel does, which means that just adding more clock speed should theoretically make it quite a bit faster. And this is like a 15 to 20% improvement in clock speed over their previous generation. So nothing else changing. If the cores themselves don't improve, and it's just clock speed improvements, you should be able to expect up to a 15 to 20% improvement over the previous generation in single-threaded tasks. So that's crazy. They've also increased their per-core L2 cache up to 1 megabyte, which is double the Ryzen 5000 series, which, again, that's going to contribute to what AMD is claiming, a 15% per core improvement over previous generation. The max TDP of the CPU is now 170 watts, which is a little bit higher than previous generation, but still significantly lower than Intel's. It's worth noting that after this event, AMD clarified that that's related to power, As relates to cooling, it's actually going to be more like 230 watts, which is more similar to Intel. So, it will be sucking down quite a bit of power in order to get boosted up to 5.5 gigahertz. But who cares? Just, get a good cooler and you're fine. They're also suggesting that it's going to be built on a new version of TSMC's 5 nanometer node. So they're not changing nodes for the manufacturing of it this year. They did talk a little bit about their new I/O die, which is the piece of silicon that sits right next to the actual processor on the CPU substrate that handles communication with the rest of the system. That's being built on a new 6 nanometer node from TSMC and includes RDNA2 graphics cores. So that means that every single AMD Ryzen processor for the Ryzen 7000 series is going to have built-in graphics.
Wow.
And they're integrated graphics using RDNA2, which is the same graphics cores that are powering PlayStation 5s and Xbox Series X's all across the world and, doing crap like ray tracing and 4K 60 FPS on those things. Obviously, they didn't say anything about how many cores would be in this, but even if it's just like 8 or 10 cores, so significantly less than, whatever's in the consoles, that is still going to be literally twice as performant as the integrated graphics in Intel CPUs. That is how much further ahead AMD's integrated graphics have always been. They're usually held back by the fact that if you want to buy an APU from AMD, which is their processors that had integrated graphics, you had to get a much lower powered CPU attached to it. But what they're saying is since they have built the graphics cores into the I/O chip, it's gonna be on every single processor, which means you can get a top of the line 16 core Ryzen 7950X, and that thing is going to have integrated graphics that wipe the floor with Intel's, which means that having the ability to hook up, up to 4 HDMI 2.1 ports or DisplayPort 2 ports actually makes a ton of sense now. So yeah, that's kind of a big deal for consumers. You don't have to have a graphics card in order to use an AMD processor now, which is great considering how graphics card prices have been the past couple of years.
Yeah, no kidding.
They are coming down, actually. Like, graphics cards are getting cheaper, so that's good. But still, it would be nice not to have to buy both if you don't need the graphics card for something else.
This just means that all those people that were hoarding the graphics cards already are going to start buying these because they have just as good of graphics built in. Like, ooh, we got to get all the graphic things. Gimme.
No, because crypto is crashing right now. So
that's
thankfully,
true. That's true.
Thankfully, that's happening as well.
That's why graphics cards are getting cheaper.
Yeah. It is worth noting that they didn't actually say anything about 3D V-cache in their presentation. So that's the thing where they take the cache, I think it's the L3 cache for the CPU, and stack it on top of the die that is the actual CPU. That's the thing that made the 5800 3D or X3D, or however they named that one. They released one CPU that had 3D V-cache like late last year. And that thing is technically the fastest, or no, it was earlier this year. Technically the fastest gaming CPU in certain scenarios, despite the fact that it is significantly less clock speed happy than Intel's offerings, simply because having a ton of V-cache actually does make a big difference in terms of performance. So they didn't say anything about that. That either means that it will be there later. They're going to release separate SKUs of the Ryzen 7000 processors that have 3D V-cache, the same as they did with the 3800X 3D, or they're just they all have it. Like, it could be that. It could be that all of the 7000 chips are going to have 3D V-cache, and AMD just isn't drawing attention to it because, who cares? We've got tons of other exciting stuff to talk about. So, in either case, I guess what we're expecting out of Ryzen 7000 is a 15 to 20% improvement over their last generation, and considering their last generation trades blows pretty handily with Intel's 12th gen processors, Intel had better have a pretty big ace up their sleeve for next year, because AMD this is not like a generational improvement. You know, like generational improvements tend to be 5 to 10%. That's what we expect. And before AMD started releasing Ryzen chips, that's not even what we were getting out of Intel. We were getting a 2 to 3% year-over-year improvement on Intel's processors, which was a nightmare to live through. Let me tell you, listener, you probably lived through it also, but you know, we can all be sad together. But you know, then Ryzen came out and suddenly we were back to like, whoa, 5 to 10%. That's a great, but that was a generational improvement. That's what we were expecting with Ryzen 7000 over Ryzen 5000 was 5 to 10%. And now here's AMD, 15 to 20. Oh, okay.
Neat.
So that's cool. Along with that, they talked about their new chipsets that are going to be driving the motherboards for these things. They only talked about 3, which incidentally did not include any of their A-series chipsets. So they have the B650, the X670, so far so good, very consistent with their previous naming scheme. Now they've added the X670 Extreme. Cool.
Isn't that what the X is supposed to be for anyways?
Right. I can guarantee at least one motherboard manufacturer is going to brand this thing as an X670X. And I'm just like, great. What is this, the early 2000s? So yeah, that's good times. What's really interesting is about these 3 chipsets that they've announced, the only difference between them appears to be how much PCIe 5.0 you get and where you get it. So on the top end, the X670 Extreme thing, you're going to get PCIe 5.0 everywhere. Every PCIe lane on the motherboard will be PCIe 5.0. Full bandwidth. Okay. On the X670 boards, you're only going to get PCIe 5.0 between your graphics slot, so the top PCIe slot, and the one M.2 slot on the board. But those PCIe 5.0 lanes will be going directly into the CPU. So you'll have 16 lanes to the CPU for the graphics card, 4 lanes for the M.2 slot, and then 4 lanes that will be going down to the chipset, which will be used to deliver PCIe 4.0 speeds to the rest of the stuff on the board. So honestly, that's probably where most people would want to land. A lot, like the vast majority of people really don't use high-speed PCIe outside of their graphics and a single SSD. So that seems like a really good compromise. And then for the people that are just absolutely baller, that are crazy, they can, just get the Extreme and you get PCIe 5.0 everywhere. And then B650 will give you PCIe 4.0 everywhere except one M.2 slot that gets PCIe 5.0 directly from the CPU. And that's probably good enough for everybody else. Like if you have an absolute top of the line graphics card, you probably still won't saturate a PCIe 4.0 slot on your board. So that's fine. If you really care, like if you're, I don't know, doing like scientific computing on your GPU or something like that, or machine learning stuff, then yeah, it might matter that you have PCIe 5.0 so you can get the X670 board. But the B650 is going to be great for basically every gamer on the planet. And I feel like that's probably more important for most people. And that's one of the mid-range boards, not the expensive ones, not the cheap ones, but the mid-range ones. And that's good. Like, good, AMD. I appreciate that. And the last thing that they talked about was actually laptops. This was kind of a departure from the rest of the event, which was really focused on Ryzen 7000. But they did announce that there are laptops that are going to be coming out this year with new APUs that pair RDNA 2 graphics. So we talked about that. These are the ones that are in the new processors that are actually very good. They're pairing those with Zen 2 quad-core CPUs. Now, Zen 2 is a couple of years old at this point. Like, that's old processor architecture. That's the Ryzen 3000 series, which were great chips, but in comparison to Ryzen 5000 and especially Ryzen 7000, they're pretty slow. But they specifically said that they're targeting $400-ish laptops. So if you are able to go this Christmas into Best Buy on Black Friday and purchase a $400 laptop, like Chromebook or cheap Windows laptop, that has a Zen 2 quad-core CPU, which means it's hyper-threaded, so that's 8 threads, and RDNA 2 graphics built in, that's $400 for actually a gaming PC. Like, not a good gaming PC, don't get me wrong, but you'll be able to play most games, like even AAA titles from a couple of years ago, at around 30 FPS in medium to low settings. Totally playable. Absolutely playable. Take that sucker with you to your dorm, and you'll be able to play whatever you want with your friends. It'll be perfect. And it's $400. Like, we're actually going to be able to recommend $400 laptops to people. And you know how Wes has been talking about how, or actually, no, I guess it's Landon that's been talking about how we're getting Steam on Chromebooks.
Yeah.
A $400 Chromebook that uses this CPU, that's actually going to be able to play games on Steam.
Yeah. And play them pretty decently well, too.
Huh. Like, it used to be that if you wanted to be able to play games on a Chromebook, really, you had to have one of the $1,000 to $1,500 ones. And even then, they were still using Intel's integrated graphics.
Yeah.
Which means that it was still trash in comparison to these. So that's actually amazing. Supposedly, those are coming out Q4 of this year. And the entire AM5 platform with the new motherboards and the Ryzen 7000 chips is supposed to be releasing, quote unquote, this fall. So probably more like winter, but whatever. So yeah, thanks AMD for making the computing industry good again.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of exciting when new products are announced. Like, you know, Intel's, like, I don't want to necessarily throw shade on Intel for this. Like, is this really impressive? Yes. Does Intel have a lot to live up to if they want to keep up with AMD's Ryzen 7000 announcement? Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, their 12th gen processors were really good, and they were competitive with AMD's processors for the first time in years, and that was great. So, like, I don't know, Intel's next chips might not look very good compared to Ryzen 7000, but the ones after that will probably be awesome, just based on how things have been going. So, like, this is actual competition in the space. This industry is actually getting better year over year in noticeable, significant ways. Like, if you bought a laptop or a computer 5 years ago, like, the processor in my gaming PC is a 2nd gen Ryzen processor. And it's not that old. It's about 4 years old. But it feels like a dinosaur compared to the new stuff. And that is so awesome when I consider that in 2011, I bought a MacBook Pro with a Haswell Intel processor in it, and that thing didn't feel out of date until fetching like 2019. It was almost 10 years. I used that thing as a daily driver for 7 years, and it didn't feel like I was losing anything because the new computers just weren't that much faster.
Well, there's that, and it has a lot to do with the optimization that Apple does.
It's true.
Because if you were to try the same thing with a Windows computer, you'd want to kill yourself.
I'm not so sure about that, genuinely. Because, I mean, for my part, I was comparing it to other Macs. You know, like I use Macs, and I was using Macs that had much newer processors that had, like, you know, high-end i7s and even like the i9s when those started getting released. And like, they just were not different than this technically, you know, quad-core i7 from 2011. And I actually have, like, you know, I have a ton of Intel processors just kind of floating around. And the fact of the matter is, I was using a 4th generation Intel i7. Yes, Intel i7 up until I bought this Ryzen chip because it performed the same like in games as 7th and 8th gen Intel i7s. Like, it just did. It did not make a difference. It didn't matter. You could buy a 6-year-old processor, and then as long as you had a reasonably up-to-date graphics card, you could play AAA titles at 120 FPS all you wanted. Like, because everybody was working under the constraints of Intel's processors just aren't getting any better. And AMD's not blameless in this because they went, like, honestly, that entire period without releasing a single good processor. Like, at least Intel's processors worked. So, you know, we take what we can get, I guess. But yeah, it's a very exciting time to be alive, especially if you're shopping for processors. Unless you really want the computer you buy now to still feel like a new computer in 2 years, because it won't. Not at the rate this is going. So, yeah. Oh well, I guess. But yeah, that's the big news out of Computex was AMD, and these are products we're going to be able to buy toward the end of this year. Pretty exciting stuff. I'm happy. Okay, so that's actually like all of my tech news. I have a little bit of gaming news, but we're going to give Landon a chance to talk so that, you know, everybody doesn't get bored of my voice and click away from the podcast.
All right. I do have some I mean, technically, yes, this is Google News. So, listener, I know I've mentioned this in the podcast at least a couple times, probably not very much, but I usually don't recommend buying first-party cases for phones, mostly because they're usually more expensive and for the same thing that you can get from a different company. Like,
yep.
I mean, Apple cases, they're all really expensive. They are really good for the most part, but they're all ridiculously expensive for what you're getting.
Yeah. Yep. As a longtime Apple customer, yes.
Yes. And same with Google cases. They've been historically pretty good, but also pretty expensive. Now, that has apparently changed, unfortunately, with the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro cases. So the past few years, I want to say the Pixel 4 and 5 for sure, maybe the 3, they had these cases that were they had like a fabric type cover on them, and they got, like, a lot of people really liked them. They obviously the cases wore differently just because it's fabric. It's not like a plastic type material. It's kind of like what Microsoft put on their keyboards for a little while for their Surface.
Yeah, like the Alcantara soft touch stuff.
Yeah,
okay.
Looks really good, feels really good, doesn't wear the best, but you know, it's decent quality still. This year for the 6 and 6 Pro, they came out with these cases that were just a plastic type material. You could get like different colors, but they were still somewhat of a transparent or clear, like even just plain clear cases. And they were a little cheaper. They were $30. They weren't like $50 or whatever, like what Apple or Google has done in the past.
Yeah.
But apparently now, 6 months after the fact, these cases are proving to not be very good at all. Not even worth the $30 that people are paying for them.
Oh.
Like, they're starting to get majorly discolored, for one. So that's a bad sign right off the bat. And apparently, either it's letting more dust in than you'd want in the back of the case, so it's scratching the glass on the back while it's in the case, or it's just bad material on the inside. One of the two. I'm assuming it's just letting dust in more than what it should. Yeah. Which, I mean, it's going to happen with almost any case you get, but this is apparently noticeable enough that, you know, it's a problem.
Yeah.
And, like, cutouts around the ports are starting to, like, misshape and different things. Like, it's just not good.
Oh, geez.
So, I mean, at this point, listener, if you have a Pixel 6 and you already bought one of these, I'm sorry. But if you were thinking of getting a Pixel 6 or have one and thinking of getting one of these cases, don't get this case. Get I mean, I've never bought a first-party case for any of my devices. I've always bought third-party because generally, like I said, they tend to be better and cheaper, especially better for the price.
Right.
Like, if you spend $50 on a third-party case, you're getting like an OtterBox Defender case that you can throw against a brick wall and your phone will be fine. Whereas if you're paying $50 for Apple's case, you're getting a clear TPU case that won't discolor, but it's not protecting your phone very well.
It's real nice plastic.
Yes. So, I mean, that, again, that's been our advice forever, is generally don't buy third or first party cases because they're just overpriced. But the Pixel 6 ones are proving to just not be good at all.
It's overpriced and crap. So
overpriced crap. Great.
Oh man, because like what you're describing, I'm a big fan of clear cases. I've been buying clear phone cases for most of my phones for as long as I've had phones. It's been a long time. And, I tend to, these days I run caseless. I run naked with my phone. And just because I like the industrial design and the way it feels. But I have a lot of experience with cheap cases. Like literally the case for my iPhone XR, pretty sure that thing cost $5. Like it was a $5 clear case from China. And did the plastic discolor? Yeah, it started to turn yellow after 2 years. It was absolutely noticeable. Did it fall apart? No, like it was fine. Like it stayed in one piece. It didn't deform. It didn't do weird stuff. Did stuff get caught underneath the edges and stuff like that? Yeah, I pulled it off periodically and wiped it down with a microfiber cloth, but nothing got scratched. There were no issues like that. So like, this is the kind of thing that I would expect out of literally a $1 case.
Yeah.
Like, as the person who normally spends between $5 and $10 on his case, what Landon is describing for these $30 cases, I would expect out of the literal cheapest $1 case you can get from China. That's pretty bad, Google.
Yeah, not good at all.
I mean, especially since the person who sold me that $1 case, they had put a markup on that in order to make some profit, Like, not a lot of profit, probably like 20 cents or something like that. But that means that Google is putting nearly a $29 markup on this case. Like, the profit margins must be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, not good.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
That's good. Good. It's not good news, but it's entertaining news. I'm entertained.
That is true. Now, on the better side of things, so another thing, listener, that you may have known about me, if you've listened for a while to our show, you'll know that I'm a fan of Star Wars. And this past weekend, as of recording, the new Obi-Wan Kenobi series has started streaming on Disney+. And I have watched the first 2 episodes. I'm loving it so far. It's fantastic. Now, I have to point something out because we've mentioned this about Star Trek and the devices that they use on Star Trek. Now, I only noticed this because of this, and when I saw it happen, I'm like, I looked close enough, and I'm like, hey, what is that? So, at some point I can't remember which episode it was, but in one of them, someone is holding a tablet-like device, and I see that, and I'm like, ooh, I have to pay attention to see what this is. In the first moment I saw it, I could only see the side profile of it, so there's no easy telling of what this is going to be. And then, conveniently, they hand it over to somebody, and you see the full front of the device. And you know what? It looked like a Star Wars tablet. It didn't look like anything you would see in modern times. It looked like something you'd see on Star Wars, and it made me very happy.
Hey, Paramount. I've got a number you should call. It's Disney's.
No,
get in touch with them.
Don't steal Jon Favreau. Do not take him away from us, please.
No, look. Jon Favreau. Paramount does not have enough money
That's true.
in ever to pay Jon Favreau enough to leave what he's got at Disney.
I mean, he's done so much with Marvel and Star Wars. He's not going anywhere. He's got his glory. Just it's set. It's done.
And at this point, I'm pretty sure Disney will just write him blank checks for any Star Wars project he wants to do on Disney Plus. Yeah. Like, that man can cash in forever. But I want Paramount to just talk to them, see if they can borrow Industrial Light and Magic for a couple of days to do their props. Like,
that's fair.
It just doesn't seem like it should be that hard to make a Galaxy Fold look like a tricorder. I'm sorry. You just got to 3D print some bits and stick them onto the outside and maybe 3D print a little cover to go across the one end of the phone or at the bottom or something like that. Like, it just doesn't feel like it should be that hard. And then you put together a basic app to have on the screen of the device with some buttons and it beeps and that kind of thing. Yeah. This is simple crap. Like, I'm sorry, I could do this. I could design this crap and I've got a 3D printer right behind me that would do it. Like, the fact that Paramount just basically had a D-brand skin on a fetching phone and called it a tricorder, I'm just so angry about this.
Yeah.
Anyways. Yeah. Okay. Well, good job, Star Wars and stuff. I haven't started Kenobi yet because I still haven't watched Moon Knight, and I feel like I need to keep up with that if I'm going to have any prayer of understanding what's going on in the MCU going forward, because I did go see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness over this past week. Great movie. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Had a really good time. But if I had not watched WandaVision and Loki, I'm not sure I would have understood it. And so that means that you kind of have to keep up with the miniseries that they're releasing on Disney Plus in order to follow the movies. And oh geez, that's
great.
That's kind of a scary prospect.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I am so far behind on Marvel movies. I'm at least 10 years behind at this point.
Yep.
And it's like, I want to watch them. I really do. But the thought, every time I sit down and think, okay, where do I start? I'm like, and I just get overwhelmed. I'm like, there's like 100 different things to watch.
Yeah. I'm not even sure where to tell you to start. Cause like, it's like if somebody were to come to me and be like, I really want to watch the Avengers and understand it. What do I need to watch to understand the Avengers? I'm like, it's pretty easy. You watch Iron Man, you watch Iron Man 2, you watch Thor, you watch Captain America, then you watch the Avengers. You're good. If somebody's like, I want to watch Avengers Age of Ultron and understand everything that's going on, it's like, it's a little bit harder. You're going to have to watch Iron Man 3 as well. You watch the first 5, watch Iron Man 3, watch Thor the Dark World, watch Captain America Winter Soldier, right? You got to get those. You're also probably going to need to watch Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, should get that in there. And then after you watch Age of Ultron, watch Ant-Man too, to get the full experience. That's your phase 2 experience. And like a little bit more crazy, a little bit more stuff going on. But, you get to the end of it and you're like, okay, all right. It says it was like 10 movies, 11 movies altogether. It's a lot, but had a good time. Okay. Now I want to watch Endgame. What do I need to do? So let's just add another 10 movies onto that. You got to watch another 10 movies before you can watch Endgame. But all right, that's just another, month of your life, but you can do it. You can catch up to that. You get to Endgame. You can watch the Spider-Man, Far From Home, I think was the one that came out right after that. You watch Spider-Man Far From Home after Endgame and you're caught up and you're good and everything's fine. But if you then ask, okay, now I want to watch Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. From the movie perspective, that seems pretty easy. You don't even have to watch Black Widow. That's kind of takes place before stuff, that like in the middle of the MCU entirely. So yeah, you've got, I honestly can't even remember what other movies. You've got the latest Spider-Man movie, No Way Home. Shang-Chi. You don't need to watch Shang-Chi, but I'd recommend you watch it. You could skip the Eternals. You don't need to watch the Eternals. You don't need to watch Black Widow. So really, it's just like, to watch Doctor Strange, we're just talking about going from Endgame to watching the Spider-Man movie and then watch Doctor Strange. That seems pretty straightforward, right? No big deal. No big deal. Except there's also about 20-something hours of TV shows that you need to watch. Like, you need to watch Loki and you need to watch WandaVision. I would actually recommend that you watch Hawkeye because it does have a little bit of tie-in. And Moon Knight isn't necessary. I haven't watched Moon Knight yet, but I suspect Moon Knight is probably going to be necessary going forward. So yeah, it's pretty daunting. And that's the worst part, is that if you're coming at this from the perspective of, I've watched Iron Man, I'd like to watch Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I'm sorry. That's like literally 100 hours of TV that you have to watch now. movies and TV shows, miniseries and stuff like that. Ugh. So yeah, good times. Good luck is what I would say. I had, though, that being said, when Spider-Man No Way Home came out, and I don't know if you know the premise of Spider-Man No Way Home, so that's the latest one.
Right.
And
I mean, I've got a general idea behind it just because I've seen enough clips and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. Like it's the one where they're like, oh, it's multiverse stuff, so that they could bring in Toby and Andrew from the previous, like the Amazing Spider-Man and the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man franchises from Sony. They could bring them in to the MCU and have them, they're kind of alternate universe Spider-Mans, but it's canon now that their universes exist alongside the MCU. And that was a ton of fun for me as fans of the old Spider-Man movies, and getting to see some of their old villains coming in and that kind of thing. Fantastic. Loved that about that movie. But when my sister said, I've got my daughter, she wants to watch the latest Spider-Man movie. She has never watched any superhero movie before. She hadn't watched the MCU Spider-Man movies. She hadn't watched any of the MCU. She hadn't watched the old Spider-Man films either. She had no idea who any of these people were. She knew that Spider-Man was a dude that shoots webs out of his wrist. And that's it. Like, she had no idea. I was like, your options are to just not see it, or just go see it and decide you don't care. And apparently her daughter had a really good time and really liked the movie. So maybe you can just jump in. and actually for you, Landon, I would say, given that you have seen, I mean, I'm assuming you've seen Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. You were there at Spider-Man 3 when we all went to see that, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, probably.
Were you not? Yeah. So yeah, like you've seen those. And I assume
have not
you've seen
the Andrew Garfield ones.
You haven't seen those?
No,
Okay.
I do need to watch those.
You know what? Go watch the first one, and then you can. I guess maybe the second one's fine. Everybody whines about it, but it's okay. But yeah, like you know what those are. If you were to go watch No Way Home, you honestly would probably have a blast, just because you would know about Tobey's Spider-Man, and that's I feel like that's probably good enough. So maybe that's where you need to start with the MCU. Start with Spider-Man No Way Home, then you can watch Doctor Strange and just pretend that the rest of it doesn't exist.
Yep. See, listener, back to Star Wars a little bit. If you've watched the original trilogy, well, if you've watched the prequels and you don't even have to watch the originals, but if you've watched the prequels at least, Obi-Wan is perfect for you. You can watch it.
Yeah.
Because you don't even really, honestly, you could probably get away with not, because they give like a 5-minute like preview of what happened in those first 3 movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend it, obviously, but you don't have to watch all the TV shows and all that stuff. I mean, I have. Right. I know all the backstories of all this stuff, but you don't need to, and it's fantastic.
Well, and that's what I really liked about the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Like, going into the Mandalorian, like, if you've watched the original trilogy, then that obviously helps with watching The Mandalorian. But the first season of The Mandalorian is just like, it's a sci-fi spaghetti western. And if you know nothing about Star Wars, it's still super entertaining and fun. And the second season of it, they obviously threw in a lot more references and callbacks to original trilogy and to, like even the Clone Wars and stuff like that. And I have not watched the Clone Wars. I know who Ahsoka Tano is. Like, I've seen pictures and that kind of thing, but I don't know like her deal. But when she shows up in the second season, they just do such a great job of introducing her that I'm like, yeah, she's a badass. That's really all you need to know.
Pretty much. I mean, it's. But once I saw that, I had to bring it to the podcast because they're using
that's fair
technology known to Star Wars.
Yep. So that's how you do it right. Turns out can be done.
Yep, it can. So, listener, if you haven't noticed this by now, like we said, there's not a lot to talk about in the tech sphere.
That's true.
This has happened a couple times before, where we go off on Star Wars or Marvel tangents because there's not a lot to talk about in the tech world.
Yep, that's true. In fact, we're basically at the end of the episode, listener. Like, look at your time, look at the time left. It's just about here, which I'm assuming because, we haven't actually finished recording yet. But if we jump into gaming, there's not much left. So, past week, a couple of weeks actually, there is news. EA is looking for buyers.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big deal. They're basically the last independent large publisher that hasn't been bought out by a major tech company at this point, I feel like. It's kind of them and Square Enix, and like Bethesda's been bought, and you know, Microsoft is trying to buy Activision Blizzard, and you know, so on and so forth. But so yeah, EA is shopping themselves around. They're trying to find some buyers. Apparently they've reached out to Amazon, Comcast, Disney, and Apple to buy. Disney, apparently they approached them first, and Disney turned them down. The rumors do suggest, actually, that Apple is seriously considering this.
Yeah,
so
I've seen that, which, to me, it makes some sense, because Apple's slowly started to try and get into this gaming thing, and they've even like started mentioning gaming more in their Mac announcements.
Yeah.
Like, that was never a thing that they talked about. It's still very small segments now. It's mostly creative stuff, but they do mention gaming on Mac, and they've got Apple Arcade now on the phone and iPad and whatnot. So if they can get EA and get those games just to like better work on their devices, that's huge.
It's quite a platform of games that they would have available to work with. And it would demonstrate that Apple is actually taking gaming seriously.
Yeah.
When they first announced Apple Arcade, that seemed to suggest that they were at least interested in taking gaming seriously. And then when they released the new Apple TV, they kind of pushed the concept of, look, it's more powerful. You can play more games on it now. Works better with Apple Arcade. In the recent Macs releases, they have mentioned, look at these graphics. They can play games, kind of thing. Like they've talked about it. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, obviously. But if they were to actually go purchase EA, that would suggest to everybody that they're serious. They're actually taking it seriously. Because see, what happened is back at about 2004, when did the Xbox come out? They were serious about gaming. They got up when they were announcing the brand new PowerPC G4. Steve Jobs stood up on stage and invited out the head of game studio Bungie to talk about this awesome new game that they were developing exclusively for the Mac called Halo, which you may recognize as a game exclusively for not the Mac. Because after that event, Microsoft bought Bungie and had them release Halo on Xbox at launch instead. Now, there was a Mac version of Halo. Didn't come to the PC, but it did come to the Mac because there was contracts already in place. But I kind of feel like at that point, Apple just felt like really jaded, like really shafted. They felt like they'd been betrayed. And so they have been just like actively ignoring and belittling gaming ever since.
I mean, Steve Jobs holds a grudge. We all know this.
Oh, man.
And if they're going to screw him over like that, he's like, hey, screw you. Obviously using different words. But you can just go away and never come back. And that's pretty much what happened. He was like, no, gaming doesn't exist on Mac because you guys suck.
Yep. Steve Jobs holds a grudge so hard that he's been holding this one from beyond the grave.
Yes.
And finally, Apple, it looks like they might be getting over it. They might be getting over the worst breakup in the history of tech, apparently. And they're going to start taking gaming seriously. And if they do buy EA, that seems to be a pretty good indication that, yes, we're ready to finally take gaming seriously again. So, okay, We'll keep you updated, listener. Nothing official has been announced. It is like we obviously know via, because big shifts of companies this large with this much money being thrown around, all of that kind of has to happen in the public view. So we know that EA is shopping themselves around. We know some of the people that they have reached out to, and we know that Disney isn't interested. But rumors suggest that Apple is, and that's where we're at right now. So we'll keep you posted. Now, my last piece of gaming news is actually going to be kind of like a super collection of Doom modders being the best people on the internet. Because it's been a while since we've talked about this, and I missed a few. So, Let's start with the Doom mod that recreates Halo Combat Evolved. So we were just talking about Halo. Why not? So just a couple of days ago, this mod was announced by a prominent Doom modding group online, and it's what it sounds like. It's Halo in Doom, basically. So like the original Doom engine, except you're playing Halo, the game. So it does include all of the Halo weapons and enemy types. Obviously, it's not like a shot-for-shot recreation of the entire game, because I don't know if you've ever tried to look at the outdoor environments for Doom. They're not super expansive in the way that you would expect for a Halo game.
Yeah, no.
Which takes place on a Halo, which is kind of huge. But, you know, they have recreated some of the more iconic levels and situations and stuff like that. And the game itself is obviously fully playable. It has all of the same character as Doom, but it's Halo. So that's kind of random and kind of fun. Now, this one is, so imagine instead of taking a massively influential first-person shooter that came after Doom and basically backporting it into Doom's engine. Suppose you took the massively influential first-person shooter that was Doom and forward-ported that into the engine of another massively influential first-person shooter. That's how we ended up with a demo. It's not currently fully released, but there is a demo for an in-progress source mod that mixes Doom and Half-Life 2. Now, Half-Life 2 is, it's kind of like, if you think about modern shooters, Half-Life 2, well, I guess the original Half-Life maybe more so, but that's basically where the concept of modern first-person shooters started. Doom obviously was like, this is first-person shooters, but Half-Life was all like, look, you can have NPCs, you can have conversations with them, you can have objectives that change from one level to the next, and so on and so forth. Basically, all of the little nuggets and quality of life things that we think about with modern FPSs kind of started with Half-Life, and more in particular with Half-Life 2. So, yeah, you can now play as Doom Guy in the Source engine with Doom weapons, but instead of fighting demons, you're fighting Combine, because it's Half-Life 2 in Source. So, yeah, that's an in-progress mod, but you can pick up the demo and play a little bit of it if you'd like to. So that came out about 2 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago, and this one I actually feel pretty stupid about missing, there was a mod for Doom that brings ray tracing, the most sophisticated piece of graphics technology, backward into the Doom 1 engine, which is the oldest still currently developed for first-person shooter engine on the planet. Like, wow. In fact, I feel pretty comfortable saying it's the oldest still currently developed for game engine on the planet. Not Probably. Just shooters, yeah. Everything. So yeah, it only supports the first 3 episodes so far, and currently only supports NVIDIA GPUs, but you can play Doom with ray tracing if you're willing to put in the work to getting this mod installed to an original Doom game file.
And you have a graphics card that can do ray tracing.
Right, yeah.
That's the harder part.
You need an RTX card specifically. It won't work with AMD's, cards that do ray tracing. But, if you've got that, you can play ray tracing in a game that has 12 pixels in it. That's like, I guess, okay, maybe 12 pixels isn't fair. 12 polygons.
Either
it's
way.
Not just pixels, 12 full polygons. But yeah, it's an extremely low resolution game by today's standards, but you can have super accurate lighting on it. And from what I've heard about people that have played the ray tracing version of Minecraft, maybe that's actually pretty cool. I guess I don't know. From what I have seen, it actually looks more surreal than anything else, but I don't know. I guess maybe that's kind of a fun way to play Doom too. So yeah. Doom modders, I don't know. They just continue to be great, just generally speaking. And yeah, I have no, these people.
They're great.
It's great. They are the best of us. This is the best of humanity.
It's true. It just proves that there really are good people out there.
This is it. They're all developing Doom mods for Reddit, but there are good people out there. All right, listener, You know what? I think we have come to the end of the episode, unless Landon does have one more thing.
No.
No.
I guess I could mention that.
Oh.
So this, I guess I could. There. Technically, this is gaming. Just because I'm a Star Wars fan, Disney did have a big Star Wars event this past week because May 25th is, the OG Star Wars Day. They had this big thing in California. That's where they premiered Obi-Wan Kenobi there. They did all this stuff. They announced a whole bunch of stuff, like all the stuff that's just making me so happy. All the new shows. They gave dates to. They gave dates to Bad Batch, Season 2. Season 3 of Mandalorian is not till freaking February, but it's coming. But good things are coming. But they did mention a new game, and I can't even remember what it's called. It's like The Young Jedi or something like that has to do with that.
Oh. Interesting. I didn't hear about this.
Here, I'm Googling it right now. Because, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is what it's called.
Oh, interesting.
It's got a 2023 release. It's basically a Fallen Order sequel.
No way.
Yep.
They're actually... Okay, good.
And from what I understand, Fallen Order was a good game, right?
It was. Yeah. No, it was one of those things where, again, EA, we hate them. They have a tendency to make stupid games for dumb reasons. But they have the Star Wars franchise license as well. So, they make all the Star Wars games, which is very frustrating, except for Lego Star Wars games. So I guess we do have that Ray of Sunshine. Yeah. But Fallen Order was basically a response to everybody, and I mean everybody, on the planet spitting on EA, literally hundreds of times every second, over the Battlefront games, which were just cash grab town city, loot box nightmares, and really dumb and not very good. So, I mean, there were good things about them, don't get me wrong. Talented developers still put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make those games. But because of EA's business practices, the games were kind of soulless and sucked. And so people were really upset with that and stop trying to force multiplayer cash grabby loot box microtransaction garbage down our throat, EA. And so EA relented and allowed Fallen Order to happen, basically. And it was not universally accepted by the community, which was kind of surprising to me because I haven't played it, but everything I looked at and saw of it, it didn't look like it was a bad game. It looked like a pretty good game. A little bit Souls-like, a little bit, hack and slashy kind of RPG type thing, but it looked like it would feel in line with the old Jedi Knight games is kind of how it looked. And I was totally over the moon with that concept, but I heard a lot of people that were like, it wasn't worth it, or it just wasn't that good, or this is not a good classic Star Wars experience and stuff like that. So I'm glad that it at least did well enough, I suppose, just because of the Star Wars license probably, that they're making a sequel, because it looked like the type of game that we should have sequels to, if you're going to make more of stuff like that, please.
Yeah. There is a trailer that was released as well for this. So if you want to get an idea of what it is going to be, look that up. I haven't actually watched it because it's gaming and it's me, but it's Star Wars. Maybe I'll watch it. But that was announced this past week, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. So that's you go. Cool. There's my little bit of gaming, and it's legit gaming news. It's not mobile gaming. This is Stadia. This is legit gaming news. This is coming to PC and Xbox and PlayStation, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I love that Stadia is not legit gaming news anymore.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true.
Yep. Good times. All right. Well, there you go, listener. A full gamut of news and Star Wars and Marvel talking, because there wasn't that much news. But we're happy that you joined us, and we're happy that you have been listening to the podcast. We appreciate it a lot. So thanks for being here. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can do that on our social medias on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. Landon checks Facebook. I don't check the Facebook. But yeah, you can do that. You can also email us at podcast@callingallplatforms.com. You can also just comment on the blog on callingallplatforms.com. You can also find us on YouTube at Calling All Platforms Tech and Calling All Platforms Gaming. And until next week, I hope you have a good one.
See ya.
Calling All Platforms is a production of Supporter Sound Studios. To learn more about how you can support the podcast, go to www.patreon.com/callingallplatforms.